The front door clicked shut and the Uber pulled away from the curb. Vivian and Declan were gone, off to the Bahamas for 5 days of white sand beaches and overpriced cocktails, while Layla watched their daughter. She turned around with a smile, ready to ask Gemma what she wanted to do first. Maybe they could make pizza from scratch. Maybe watch that movie about the talking dog she loves so much. Maybe just sit together on the couch and read, the way they always did. But Gemma wasn't reaching for her iPad. She wasn't opening her text-to-speech app. She wasn't typing out a message the way she'd done for 6 years. She was just standing there, staring, and there was something in her eyes Layla had never seen before. Something urgent, something afraid. And then her niece, the child Layla believed couldn't speak, the little girl who hadn't made a single sound since she was 3 years old, opened her mouth. She told Layla not to eat the chocolates, that Mom and Declan put something in them. Her voice was clear, perfect, like she'd been speaking her whole life. Layla looked at the kitchen counter. The box of Belgian chocolates sat there, wrapped in gold foil with a red ribbon, a gift from her sister, a thank you for watching Gemma. Vivian knew how much Layla loved chocolate. She'd known since they were kids. Her blood turned to ice. But that's getting ahead of the story, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about family, about trust, and about the price of silence. Her name is Layla Storm. She's 34 years old, and she works as a senior software developer for a tech company based in Boston. Most of her work is remote, which means she spends 4 days in her home office, staring at code, debugging systems, and pretending that talking to her computer counts as social interaction. She makes $145,000 a year. Good money, stable career, the kind of job that makes your parents proud and your friends slightly bored at dinner parties. Her therapist says she uses logic to avoid emotions. Her therapist is probably right.
But here's the thing about logic. It doesn't lie, it doesn't manipulate, it doesn't smile at you while planning your destruction. People do that. And Layla was about to learn just how well her own sister had mastered that particular skill. The Storm family, or what's left of it. Layla's father, Richard Storm, died 4 years ago. Heart attack. He was 61, still working, still planning that fishing trip to Alaska he'd been talking about for 20 years. One morning, he was drinking coffee and reading the Globe. By noon, he was gone. Her mother, Patricia, held on longer, but cancer doesn't care about willpower. It took her 16 months ago, slowly, painfully, while Layla moved back from San Francisco to be by her side. Vivian, her oldest sister, visited maybe once a month during those final months. 20-minute visits, always with an excuse ready. The traffic was terrible. Declan needed the car. Gemma had a thing at school. Layla was the one who held her mother's hand when she couldn't eat anymore. She was the one who slept in the chair beside her hospital bed. She was the one who heard her final words, whispered so softly she almost missed them. Her mother told her to watch her sister, that something was wrong in her heart. Now she does. When their mother passed, she left behind a trust, $1.4 million, everything their parents had saved over 40 years of marriage, their father's life insurance, the equity from their house, every penny they had worked for. The terms were specific. Both Layla and Vivian had to sign for any withdrawal over $10,000. Their mother was careful that way. She wanted to make sure neither daughter could drain the account without the other knowing. She also left Layla the family home in Brookline, a 4-bedroom colonial worth about $780,000. Vivian was furious. She said it wasn't fair. She said she had a daughter to raise, responsibilities Layla couldn't understand. But their mother knew what she was doing. Even at the end, even when the morphine made her drift in and out, she knew exactly who her daughters really were.
Vivian was 3 years older than Layla. Growing up, she was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who could talk her way out of any trouble. Layla was the quiet one, the awkward one, the girl who preferred books to parties and computers to people. Vivian got pregnant at 19. The father was some guy she met at a club. He disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. Classic story. She had Gemma alone, raised her alone, struggled alone. Then she met Declan Rice. He was charming, handsome in that slightly weathered way, a sales director for a medical equipment company, always talking about big deals and bigger commissions. He drove a BMW he couldn't quite afford and wore watches that cost more than Lila's first car. They got married fast, too fast. Within a year, Declan had moved into Vivian's apartment, then convinced her to buy a house in Newton they couldn't really afford. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen with marble countertops and appliances they never used. He never adopted Gemma, said he wanted to, but the paperwork was complicated, the timing was never right. Looking back, Layla thinks he just didn't want the legal responsibility. Gemma was Vivian's daughter, Vivian's problem. He was just the guy who lived there and spent their money. And then there was Gemma. She was the brightest little girl Layla had ever known. When she was 2, she was already speaking in full sentences. By 3, she was asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. Why is the sky blue? Why do people die? Why does mommy cry when she thinks I'm asleep? And then, seemingly overnight, she stopped. Vivian said it was neurological, something about the speech centers in her brain, a rare condition the doctors caught when she was 3. Nothing could be done. Gemma would communicate through other means, text-to-speech apps, written words. Layla believed her. Why wouldn't she? Vivian was her sister. Mothers know their children. But here's what Layla didn't know. Gemma wasn't mute because of a neurological condition. Gemma was mute because her mother terrorized her into silence. And she stayed silent for 6 years to protect her aunt. Before we dive deeper, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. Gemma was 3 years old when it happened. A normal afternoon. She was playing upstairs in her room, some game with stuffed animals and complicated rules only she understood. She got thirsty, so she crept downstairs to get some juice, the way she always did. Mommy was in the kitchen, talking on the phone. She didn't notice the little girl standing in the doorway. Gemma heard words. Most of them she didn't understand, but some of them she recognized. Aunt Layla, money, out of the picture. When the old lady dies, we get everything. She trusts me completely. She's so stupid. She was 3 years old. She didn't know what out of the picture meant. She didn't understand trusts or inheritance or betrayal. But she understood Aunt Layla, and she understood the cold, mean way her mommy said stupid. The next day, innocent and confused, Gemma asked her mother a question. She wanted to know what out of the picture meant. Vivian's face went cold, colder than Gemma had ever seen it. She grabbed Gemma's arms, too hard, leaving little bruises that would fade before anyone noticed, and knelt down until they were face to face. Her voice was a whisper, but it was the scariest whisper Gemma had ever heard. She told Gemma to listen very carefully, that if she ever spoke again to anyone about anything, something terrible would happen to Aunt Layla, that her voice was dangerous, that every word she said hurt her aunt, that if she loved her auntie, she'd never make another sound. Gemma loved Layla. She was the aunt who brought her picture books and read them in funny voices, the one who smiled at her like she was the most special thing in the world, the one whose visits made everything feel safe. So Gemma stopped talking. She was 3 years old. She made a decision to give up her voice to protect someone she loved. For the next 6 years, every time she wanted to speak, she remembered her mother's words. Every time she wanted to laugh out loud, to sing, to say, "I love you," she swallowed the sound. She learned to communicate through apps and written notes. She learned to be invisible. She watched other kids in school raise their hands, tell jokes, make friends easily. She sat in the corner and typed on her iPad. Teachers praised her for being such a good listener. They had no idea she was drowning in words she couldn't say. And Vivian used that silence as a weapon. For 6 years, that child watched and waited, and she saw everything. 6 months before that Saturday, Layla discovered something strange in the trust account. $47,000 had disappeared over the course of several months, small withdrawals, never more than $8,000 or $9,000 at a time, always just under the threshold that would require both signatures. Except they had both signatures, hers and Vivian's. The problem was, Layla hadn't signed anything. She called Vivian, confronted her, as much as she ever confronted anyone. Her sister's response was immediate. Tears, apologies, a flood of explanations. Declan had made some bad investments. They were behind on the mortgage. She'd been too embarrassed to ask for help properly. She'd forged Lila's signature, yes, but only because she knew Layla would say yes anyway. She was going to pay it all back, every penny. She just needed time. Layla should have gone to the police, should have contacted a lawyer, should have protected herself. Instead, she let it go, because that's what she always did with Vivian. She let things go. But some things don't stay buried. Then there was Thanksgiving, 5 months before the Bahamas trip. 14 people crammed around Vivian's dining table, turkey and tension in equal measure. Declan had been drinking since noon. His cheeks were flushed, his voice too loud, his jokes landing with the subtlety of a sledgehammer.
Halfway through dinner, he raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, and then he looked directly at Layla. "And to Layla, still coding away in that big empty house." He laughed. "Maybe the computers are better company than people, right? At least they do what you tell them." Scattered laughter around the table. Vivian didn't defend her. She just smiled that careful smile and changed the subject. Later, in the kitchen, Layla found her sister loading the dishwasher. She asked why Vivian let Declan talk to her that way. Vivian didn't look up. She told Layla not to be so sensitive, that he was just joking, that Layla knew how she could be sometimes. She let that word hang in the air, a lot, that Layla could be a lot. Layla stood at the sink with her hands in soapy water. She could feel her jaw clenching, her fingers tightening around the sponge, but she didn't say anything. She just kept washing dishes until her knuckles turned white. That wasn't even the worst part of that Thanksgiving. What happened next would change everything. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, Layla went looking for her jacket. She left it in the upstairs guest room. As she climbed the stairs, she heard voices from the master bedroom. The door was open a crack. Vivian and Declan talking about her. Vivian was saying how pathetic Layla was. 34 years old, no husband, no kids, just sitting in that house counting her money. That their mom left her everything and she didn't even know how to enjoy it. Declan laughed, said at least she was useful, free babysitting whenever they needed it, and she'd never say no, that Vivian had her trained. Vivian's voice was cold, amused. She said Layla had been trained since they were kids, that she thought being the good one meant being the doormat, that she'd figured that out when they were teenagers. Some people are takers and some people are givers. Layla would give until there was nothing left, and Vivian would be there to take it. Layla stood in that hallway, jacket forgotten, listening to her sister describe her like she was a resource to be exploited, a mark, a fool.
She should have confronted her, should have stormed in and demanded an explanation. Instead, she crept back downstairs, collected her things, and left without saying goodbye. That's who Layla was then, the sister who washed dishes and swallowed insults and never made waves. That's not who she is now. Back to that Saturday, back to Gemma standing in the hallway with 6 years of silence breaking apart behind her eyes. Layla set the chocolate box down on the counter like it was a bomb. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Then she turned back to Gemma and sank down to her knees, bringing herself to her niece's eye level. She whispered her name, like speaking too loud might break whatever spell had finally let her speak. She asked if Gemma could really talk. Gemma nodded. Her eyes were huge, scared, but there was something fierce in them too. Something that had been waiting 6 years to come out. She told Layla she always could, that Mommy made her stop. The room tilted. Layla had to put a hand on the floor to steady herself. She asked what Gemma meant by that, and that's when her 9-year-old niece told her a story that ripped apart everything she thought she knew about her family. She told her about the phone call she overheard when she was 3, the words she didn't understand, the question she asked the next day, and the threat that followed. 6 years of silence. 6 years of terror, thinking that every word she spoke might hurt the person she loved most. Layla sat there on her sister's kitchen floor, tears streaming down her face as this child explained the sacrifice she'd made. Her 9-year-old niece gave up her voice to protect her, and her sister used that love as a weapon. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. But Gemma had more to tell her. because being silent had made her invisible. Adults forgot she was there. They talked freely around her, assuming she couldn't understand, couldn't tell anyone even if she did. Gemma saw everything. She saw her mother practicing Layla's signature over and over on scrap paper. The loop on the L was never quite right, but Vivian kept trying. She heard phone conversations about the trust, and before Layla figures it out, and we'll tell them she's unstable, nobody will believe her. She watched Declan become more and more afraid of her mother. He agreed to everything, never questioned anything. He was in too deep, and Vivian made sure he knew it. She observed her mother perform for neighbors, church friends, teachers, the perfect mask of a devoted mother making sacrifices for her special needs daughter. The community gave Vivian awards. Literally, there was a plaque on the mantle, Mother of the Year. That plaque made Layla want to scream. And then, 2 nights before the Bahamas trip, Gemma heard something that made her realize she couldn't stay silent anymore. She'd crept to the top of the stairs, like she'd done hundreds of times before. Vivian and Declan were in the kitchen, planning. Vivian said the chocolates would make Layla sick enough for the ER, concentrated laxative compound, plus a mild sedative. She'd be violently ill for 2, maybe 3 days, barely conscious. Declan asked about Gemma while they were gone. Vivian said Mrs. Holloway next door would take her, that she'd already told her Layla had episodes sometimes, anxiety, paranoia. The woman bought it completely. And while Layla was in the hospital, Vivian continued, they'd drive to Providence. She'd found a lawyer there, Mitchell Crow, who specialized in emergency trust transfers. She had all the forged documents ready, power of attorney, medical incapacity declarations, everything. They'd transfer the entire trust to her name alone. By the time Layla recovered, it would be done. She'd never be able to prove anything, and even if she tried, Vivian had a file full of evidence that Layla was mentally unstable. Nobody would believe her. No cruise, no Bahamas vacation, just a scheme to poison her, forge her signature, and steal $1.4 million. Her own sister. The worst part? This was only the beginning. Layla pulled Gemma into her arms and held her tight, this brave, incredible child. She'd carried this weight for 6 years.
She'd watched her mother lie to everyone, and when it truly mattered, she found the courage to break her silence. Layla whispered into her hair that she'd saved her, asked if Gemma knew that she'd saved her life. Gemma hugged her back, small arms fierce around her neck. She told Layla she couldn't let Mommy hurt her, not anymore. They thought they had 5 days to steal everything. They thought Layla would be lying in a hospital bed, too sick to fight. They were wrong. The first call Layla made was to Tessa Vaughn. Tessa and Layla had been roommates in college. Tessa went into nursing, Layla went into code. Different paths, but they stayed close. She was the kind of friend who showed up with wine during breakups and told you the truth even when it hurt. She answered on the second ring, asked what was wrong. Layla told her she needed her to come to her sister's house right now, that something happened and she couldn't explain it over the phone. Something in her voice must have scared Tessa. She didn't ask questions, just said she was on her way. 40 minutes later, she was at the door, still in scrubs from her shift, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, worry written across her face. She told Layla to talk to her, so Layla did. All of it. The chocolates, the scheme, and Gemma, sweet, silent Gemma who had spoken for the first time in 6 years to warn her. When she finished, Tessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked over at Gemma, who was sitting on the couch, watching them with those big, serious eyes. Tessa walked over and knelt down in front of her. She told Gemma she was the bravest kid she'd ever met. Gemma almost smiled. It was the first time Layla had seen anything close to happiness on her face since her parents left. Tessa stood up, all business now. She said the chocolates needed to be tested, that she knew someone at the hospital lab who owed her about 14 favors. She could run a rush analysis tonight. If there was anything wrong with them, they'd know by morning.
She pulled on latex gloves, because of course she had some in her purse, and carefully collected a sample from one of the chocolates, sealed it in a small container. She muttered about what kind of person puts something in chocolate. Layla almost laughed. Almost. Tessa asked what else Layla had, said there had to be more evidence if Vivian had been running this scam. Layla looked at Gemma, asked if she knew where Mommy kept important papers. Gemma nodded and climbed off the couch. She said they were in Declan's office, that there was a locked drawer. She knew the code. Layla asked how she knew the code. Gemma told her she watched him type it, lots of times. A small, sad pause. Nobody ever notices the quiet kid. That decision would cost them everything. Gemma led them to the home office, a neat, carefully decorated room with a large desk, expensive computer, and filing cabinets that probably contained nothing but tax returns and lies. One drawer had a digital lock, 4 numbers. Gemma said the code, 0917, September 17th, their wedding anniversary. Of course, Vivian would use something sentimental, made her feel clever. Layla punched in the code, the drawer clicked open. What they found inside made her stomach turn. First, bank authorization forms, Layla's signature at the bottom, except it wasn't her signature. It was close, really close, but she could see the difference immediately. The loop on her capital L was wrong, the slant was off. Anyone who really knew her handwriting would notice. Vivian had practiced, but she wasn't perfect. Second, bank statements from the trust account, 14 months of activity, withdrawal after withdrawal, always in amounts under $10,000, always just below the threshold that would require both signatures and trigger automatic reporting. She'd done her research. She knew exactly how to steal without setting off alarms. The total was $183,000 gone, stolen by her own sister, while Layla sat in her house, trusting her completely. Third, printed emails between Vivian and an attorney in Providence, Rhode Island, Mitchell Crow. They discussed emergency transfer of trust assets, referenced Layla's mental instability, and outlined a meeting scheduled for day 4 of the Bahamas trip, the meeting where Vivian planned to steal everything Layla had left. Fourth, and this one nearly broke her, was a file labeled Layla Mental Health Concerns. Inside were pages of notes in Vivian's handwriting, dated entries describing Layla's erratic behavior, her depression, her paranoid episodes. Complete fabrications, all of it. She was building a paper trail, preparing to paint Layla as mentally unfit in case she ever challenged the fraud. Her own sister was planning to call her crazy, to destroy her credibility, to take everything and leave her with nothing, not even her reputation. Tessa photographed every single document, every page, every date. She said it was premeditated fraud, that this wasn't some impulsive thing. Vivian had been planning this for over a year. Then Layla did something that felt natural to her, but probably wouldn't occur to most people. She opened her laptop and checked Declan's Instagram. He wasn't smart enough to turn off location services. Most people aren't. There it was, a story posted that morning. Declan grinning at the camera, airport coffee in hand. Off to paradise, the caption read, with a palm tree emoji. But the geotag didn't say Miami International. It didn't say any airport at all. It said Providence, Rhode Island. They weren't even pretending to go to the Bahamas. They were 45 minutes away, preparing to rob her. They thought she was the naive one, the quiet sister who'd never fight back. But she'd spent 15 years solving problems in code, and this was just another bug to fix.
Vivian thought silence was her greatest weapon. She never expected it to become Layla's. The lab results came back that night. The chocolates contained a concentrated combination of bisacodyl, an industrial-strength laxative, and valerian extract, a natural sedative. The amounts were precise, not enough to cause permanent damage, just enough to incapacitate someone for 48 to 72 hours, hospital-level sick, exactly like Gemma said. Vivian hadn't tried to kill Layla. She was too smart for that. She just needed her out of commission long enough to steal everything. The next call Layla made was to Derek Mullins. They'd worked together at her first tech job, back when they were both junior developers surviving on coffee and stubborn optimism. He'd left tech years ago to become a fraud investigator. Corporate stuff mostly, insurance scams, embezzlement cases, exactly the kind of thing she needed. Derek owed her. She'd written a recommendation letter that got him his current job. Time to collect. He listened to everything. Then he connected her with Angela Soaz, an assistant prosecutor in Suffolk County.
the kind of person who got excited about paper trails and forged signatures. Angela reviewed the evidence and didn't mince words. She said this was federal, interstate wire fraud, the money crossing state lines, the Providence lawyer, the conspiracy elements. This wasn't just local. The FBI would want a piece of this. Angela coordinated with local police. They contacted the FBI, and someone reached out to Mitchell Crow, the Providence attorney who was supposed to facilitate the theft. Turned out Crow had been having doubts. The signatures on the authorization forms looked slightly off to him. He'd been considering canceling the meeting anyway. When authorities explained what was actually happening, he agreed to cooperate fully. The sting was set for day 4. When Vivian and Declan walked into that law office expecting to complete their theft, police would be waiting. But first, they needed Gemma's testimony.
A child advocacy specialist came to the house. Everything was done properly, videotaped, a child psychologist present, following all legal protocols for minor witnesses. Gemma was nervous. She sat in a chair that was too big for her, feet dangling above the floor. But when the questions started, she sat up straight. She used her voice, still new, still strange after 6 years of silence, and she told them everything. What she heard when she was 3, the threat, the fear, the decision to stop speaking, the years of watching and listening, the night she overheard the plan about the chocolates. When it was over, she looked at Layla through the observation window. She said that was the most she'd talked since she was 3. Her voice sounded tired, but something in it was lighter, like she'd been holding her breath underwater for years and finally came up for air. Layla hugged her so tight she probably squeezed all the air right back out. She told her one more day, just one more day, and this would be over. One more day. The next 2 days or a performance. Layla played the sick sister perfectly. Text messages to Vivian, carefully crafted to sound weak and confused. Day 1, she said something was wrong, that she'd been throwing up all night, so dizzy. Vivian's response came 4 hours later, a text, not a call. She said, "Oh no, feel better, make sure to stay hydrated." Heart emoji. She didn't ask about Gemma, didn't offer to come home, didn't express any real concern at all. Day 2, Layla said she had to go to urgent care, that they thought it might be food poisoning, so strange, that she could barely stand, that Gemma was fine, Mrs. Holloway next door was helping with her. Vivian's response was brief. She said that was awful. Rest up, they'd be home in a few days. Don't worry about anything. Pink heart emoji. Don't worry about anything. Right, because why would Layla worry? She was just lying in a hospital bed, too sick to notice her sister stealing her inheritance.
Except she wasn't in a hospital bed. She was in Vivian's living room building a case. Day 4, Providence, Rhode Island, 10:15 in the morning. The law office of Mitchell Crow occupied the 3rd floor of a professional building downtown. Nice view of the city, tasteful art on the walls, the kind of place where important documents got signed and lives got changed. Today, lives were definitely going to change, just not the way Vivian expected. Layla wasn't there in person. Angela set up a secure video feed so she could watch from Vivian's living room. Gemma sat beside her, holding her hand. Tessa was on her other side, her jaw tight with anticipation. They watched the lobby camera as Vivian and Declan walked through the front door. Vivian looked perfect, professional dress in navy blue, modest jewelry, expression carefully arranged into concerned sister mode. She was carrying a leather folder, the same one from Declan's office, full of forged documents and stolen dreams. Declan looked like he was going to be sick, sweating through his expensive shirt, eyes darting around the lobby like he expected someone to jump out and arrest him. His instincts were better than Layla gave him credit for. They approached the receptionist, smiled, gave their names. The receptionist smiled back, pleasant and professional, and led them down a hallway toward the conference room, where 4 people were waiting. Vivian walked in first, confident, ready to close the biggest deal of her life. Mitchell Crow sat at the head of the table, gray-haired, serious, wearing the kind of reading glasses that made him look like someone's disappointed grandfather.
He didn't smile when Vivian entered, didn't stand to shake her hand. 3 other people sat at the table, a man and a woman in plain clothes, professional and alert, and another woman with a badge visible at her belt. Vivian hesitated in the doorway, her smile flickered. She said she thought this was a private meeting, that honey-sweet voice again, the one she used when she sensed something was off.
Crow's response was flat. He addressed her formally and asked her to have a seat. He introduced Detectives Morrison and Chen from the Providence Police Department and Special Agent Holloway from the FBI. Said they had some questions about the documentation she'd submitted. Through the video feed, Layla watched her sister's face, the flicker of confusion, the quick calculation behind her eyes, the decision to brazen it out. She sat down, crossed her legs, folded her hands on the table, the picture of cooperative innocence. She said, of course, whatever she could help with, asked if there was some problem with the paperwork. Declan hadn't moved from the doorway. His face had gone the color of old milk. Detective Morrison asked him to please join his wife. He shuffled to the table like a man walking to his own execution, which, in a way, he was. Detective Morrison was calm, almost friendly. She began with basic questions: Vivian's identity, her relationship to Layla, her role as co-trustee of their parents' estate. Vivian confirmed everything, smooth, confident. She still thought she could talk her way out. She had no idea what was coming. Morrison placed 2 documents on the table, side by side. On the left, Layla's signature from the forged authorization forms. On the right, Layla's real signature from verified bank records. Morrison asked Vivian to explain why these signatures didn't match. For just a second, barely a heartbeat, panic flashed across Vivian's face. Then the mask slammed back down. She said her sister had very inconsistent handwriting, that she'd always been that way, that honestly she wasn't well mentally, that she had documentation about her instability, that she could show them. Detective Chen cut her off. He said they'd reviewed her documentation, the notes about Layla's supposed mental health issues. He paused, let the silence stretch. Said there was an interesting thing, that her employer described Layla as one of the most detail-oriented people they'd ever worked with.
That her doctor confirmed she was in excellent mental and physical health. That 3 colleagues provided statements calling her exceptionally stable and trustworthy. The mask was cracking. Vivian said that was different, that they didn't see her like family did, that family knew the truth. Morrison's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. She said they had bank records showing $183,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over 14 months. They had email correspondence with this office discussing emergency trust transfers. They had forensic analysis of Layla's signatures, proving forgery. She placed another document on the table. And they had laboratory analysis of the chocolates Vivian prepared for her sister, a concentrated combination of bisacodyl and valerian extract, enough to hospitalize someone for several days. Vivian's face twitched, just for a second, then she recovered. She said that was ridiculous, that those were Belgian chocolates, imported, expensive, that she bought them from a specialty shop on Newberry Street, that if there was anything wrong with them, it happened at the store. Morrison shook her head slowly. She said they'd traced the chocolates, that the shop confirmed the purchase. They also confirmed the chocolates were perfectly safe when Vivian bought them. What she did to them afterward was on her. She pulled out another photograph, a close-up of the chocolates, cut open to reveal something that shouldn't have been there. The lab found injection marks, tiny holes in the bottom of each piece. Whoever contaminated these chocolates took their time, made sure the poison was distributed evenly, made sure whoever ate them would consume a significant dose. Declan made a sound, a small strangled noise like a wounded animal. Vivian was frozen. The honey-sweet expression was gone. What was left underneath was something cold and cornered. Morrison continued. She said Vivian poisoned her sister's chocolates, not to kill her, she was too smart for that. She just needed her incapacitated long enough to steal her inheritance. Vivian's voice came out sharp, defensive. She said that was absurd, that those were a gift, that she'd never hurt her own sister, that this was some kind of setup. Special Agent Holloway spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but carried weight. She addressed Vivian formally and told her that interstate wire fraud was a federal offense, that she was looking at up to 20 years, that she'd suggest thinking very carefully about her next words. And then Morrison pulled out a tablet. She said there was one more piece of evidence they'd like her to hear. She pressed play. Gemma's voice filled the conference room, clear, steady, unmistakable. She said her mommy told her when she was 3 that if she ever talked again, something bad would happen to Auntie Layla. That she said her voice was dangerous, that every word she said hurt her aunt, so she stopped talking for 6 years to protect her. The recording continued, Gemma describing what she'd overheard, the phone call when she was 3, the night before the Bahamas trip, the conversation about the chocolates, every detail delivered in that careful, serious voice. She said she couldn't let Mommy hurt Auntie Layla, that she was the only one who ever really listened to her, even when she couldn't talk. The recording ended. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after something breaks beyond repair. Beside Layla on the couch, Gemma squeezed her hand. She could feel her trembling, or maybe that was Layla. On the screen, Vivian's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, denial, fear, and finally something ugly, something raw. She stared at the tablet like it had grown teeth and bitten her. She stammered that it wasn't possible, that Gemma couldn't talk, that she'd been mute since she was 3 years old, that this was fabricated, that they'd fabricated this. Her voice rose with each word. By the end, she was almost shouting. She said her daughter couldn't speak, that she had a neurological condition, that she had doctor's reports, years of documentation, that this recording was fake, AI or something, that they'd manufactured this to frame her. Morrison's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. The gentleness made it worse. She addressed Vivian formally and said she just confirmed that she believed her daughter couldn't speak, but according to medical records, the real ones, not what she told her family, Gemma was diagnosed with selective mutism, a psychological condition, often caused by trauma or fear. She let that sink in. She said Vivian's daughter stopped speaking because she terrorized her into silence for 6 years. That was child psychological abuse added to fraud, forgery, and attempted poisoning. Vivian's face twisted. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered completely. What came out was ugly, raw, the real Vivian, finally visible. She said Gemma was supposed to stay quiet, that she was never supposed to. Declan's voice cut in, shaking. He told her to stop talking, just stop. He turned to the detectives. His words came out in a rush. He said he wanted a lawyer, a separate lawyer, that he'd cooperate, that he'd tell them everything, that she planned all of it, the signatures, the transfers, the chocolates, that he was just scared of her, that he knew it was wrong, but she said, his voice cracked. He said he'd testify, whatever they needed. Vivian turned on him with a fury that made even the detectives tense. She called him a pathetic coward, asked if after everything she did for them, he was going to turn on her now. Her voice kept rising. The mask wasn't just cracking, it was shattering into 1,000 pieces. She said she made them rich, that she got them everything they had, that house, those cars, the life he wanted, and he couldn't even keep his mouth shut for 5 minutes. Declan shrank back in his chair. He said he didn't know about the chocolates, that he swore he didn't know what she put in them. Vivian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. She said he knew enough, that he knew what they were doing, that he just didn't want to get his hands dirty. That he wanted the money, but not the work. That was always his problem. That he was a coward. He was a coward when she met him, and he was a coward now. Detective Chen stood. His voice was firm. He addressed Vivian formally and said she was under arrest for fraud, forgery, wire fraud, attempted poisoning, and child abuse. He asked her to please stand and place her hands behind her back. Vivian didn't move at first. She looked around the room like she was searching for an exit that didn't exist, for someone who would take her side, for one more person she could manipulate. There was no one. Agent Holloway stepped forward. She said her name. Then, now. Vivian stood, slowly, stiffly. Her eyes found the camera in the corner of the room, the one feeding to Lila's screen. She stared directly into it. Her voice was a whisper now, venomous, thin. She asked if Layla thought she'd won, if she thought this was over. She said Layla had no idea what she was capable of, that she never did. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She was still talking, still trying to explain, to justify, to manipulate, but there was no one left to manipulate. Everyone in that room had seen the evidence. Everyone had heard her own daughter's testimony. She was led out of the conference room, out of the building, into a waiting police car. Layla watched through the video feed as her sister, the golden child, the perfect mother, the woman who had terrorized a 3-year-old into silence and tried to poison her own sister, disappeared into the back of that car. Gemma squeezed her hand again. She said it was over. It was over. Tessa let out a long breath. She said 6 years. That little girl stayed silent for 6 years to protect Layla. And her sister, she shook her head. There weren't words bad enough. Layla couldn't speak. She just pulled Gemma close and held her while tears streamed down her face. But they weren't sad tears, not entirely. They were relief. They were gratitude. They were the release of something she hadn't even known she was carrying.
The aftermath was messy. Justice usually is. Vivian faced multiple felony charges, federal and state. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own lawyer advised her to take a plea deal rather than face a jury that would hear her 9-year-old daughter testify against her. She took the deal, 4 to 7 years. She'll be out eventually, but she won't be walking out to anything good. Declan cooperated fully, turned state witness. His testimony filled in gaps they didn't even know existed. 18 months in a minimum security facility, plus 5 years probation. He signed away his parental rights without hesitation. Layla doesn't think he'd ever wanted Gemma. Not really. The trust was frozen, audited, and eventually restored to Layla's sole control. Most of the stolen money was traced and recovered. The family home in Brookline is hers outright now. Vivian's house in Newton was sold to cover her legal fees. Turns out all that marble and those luxury appliances don't mean much when you're paying attorneys by the hour. And Gemma. Emergency custody was granted the week after Vivian's arrest. The hearing was quick. The evidence was clear. A child psychologist testified that Gemma had been subjected to years of psychological abuse designed to silence her. The judge didn't hesitate. She's Layla's now, legally, officially, permanently. The first few weeks were hard. Gemma had spent 6 years believing her voice was dangerous. You don't unlearn something like that overnight. Some mornings she'd wake up and forget. She'd start to say something, then stop. Her hand would go to her throat, like she was checking to make sure the words hadn't escaped. Layla would see the fear flash across her face, the old programming kicking in. Those moments broke her heart every time. But slowly, day by day, Gemma started to trust. Trust that speaking wouldn't hurt anyone. Trust that her voice was hers to use. Trust that she was finally safe. Her therapist says she's making remarkable progress. For a child who experienced that level of psychological manipulation at such a young age, she's incredibly resilient.
The therapist calls her a survivor. Layla calls her a hero. Last Saturday morning, they had breakfast on Layla's back porch. Pancakes, because Gemma has decided that pancakes are the superior breakfast food, and she will debate anyone who disagrees. Orange juice and fancy glasses, because she said fancy glasses make everything taste better. She's not wrong. Gemma was telling Layla about a dream she'd had, something about a penguin who could drive a car, a castle made entirely of waffles, and a very polite dragon named Gerald who apologized every time he accidentally set something on fire. It made absolutely no sense. It was perfect. Layla sipped her coffee and listened, really listened, the way she always did, the way she always will. This is what family is supposed to sound like. Not silence, not lies, not manipulation and fear. Just this, a kid rambling about waffle castles, morning light through the trees, two people who chose each other, sitting together, talking about nothing and everything. Gemma paused mid-story and looked at her. She said, "Auntie Layla," and then, "Thank you for listening, for real listening, even when she couldn't talk." Layla reached over and squeezed a hand. Always, always. Gemma smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches all the way to the eyes. Some people think silence means weakness, but Gemma stayed silent for 6 years to protect someone she loved. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing Layla has ever seen. And now Gemma has a voice again, and Layla will spend the rest of her life making sure she never has to lose it.